The wedding preparations continued, and Dise was home, admiring her wedding dress, when Efosa's mother visited her home and informed her that the wedding would not hold. Over my dead body, will I allow a woman with no vagina to marry my only son? You are not complete yourself. How then do you think that you can complete my son? She asked Dise, whose heart shattered to see her whole world crumble before her eyes. Your father thinks he can make this so easy, she said to Dise, who she told to warn her father to stay away from them. Dise stood there stunned as she tried to figure out all that was happening. My father? What has he got to do with all of this? She said to herself as she sat there and waited for her father to return, her heart beating as her mind wandered far and wide, trying to figure out everything by herself. Night came, but her father had still not returned. This was unlike him, who always ensured to be home before 8 p.m. every day. It was now 10 in the night, and Dise could not shake off the feeling that something was wrong. She called up his phone repeatedly, but his line was not reachable. Where could he be? She thought to herself as she decided to head to his office to see if he was safe. Dise got on a taxi and headed straight for her father's office. Everywhere seemed deserted, but Dise realized that her father's car was still parked in the parking lot. She rushed up to his office and found him in tears. All her life, this was the first time that she was seeing her father in tears, and the look on his face was that of a man who was so broken beyond words. Dise walked gently towards him, seeing the sadness in his eyes as she tried to comfort him.
Whatever it is, father, I am sure we can walk through it.
She said with a calm voice, trying to calm him like a crying infant. Her father, who was now stuttering, pleaded for her forgiveness as he said to her that there was something that she needed to know. Dise stepped back for a second as she watched her father, who gestured to her to sit down. Dise could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she sat down, wondering what her father had to say. The silence in the room was so loud that her heartbeat could be heard, thumping through her chest. Her father, with a calm voice, confessed to her that he was the one responsible for her mother's death. I beat her to death, he said, as tears poured down his eyes. Dise could not believe her ears. All the while, she believed her father loved her mother so much and refused to remarry because of this. Little did she know that her father was the one responsible for her mother's death. What had happened was that her father Ejiro returned home one evening and realized that his food was not on the table. His pregnant wife was asleep on the sofa, and this angered him greatly as he woke her up with a dirty slap. Before she could understand what was happening, he began to beat her mercilessly, not caring that she was heavily pregnant. You lazy woman, how dare you sleep all day without preparing my food? He said to her repeatedly as he threw punches at her. Ejiro was a very violent man who beat his wife at every given opportunity. His wife Ese lost two pregnancies in the past and almost died during the last evacuation she had because of some complications she suffered. Not long afterwards, she got pregnant again, and the doctor advised that she avoids any form of stress as this could endanger her unborn baby and herself. Ese, earlier that afternoon, spent hours preparing her husband's favorite meal. Once she was done cooking, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach and decided to lay down to rest. Feeling so exhausted, she drifted into a very deep sleep and was awoken by Ejiro, who gave her a very hot slap on her face. This was followed by several punches and blows that rendered her unconscious. This Ejiro did, not knowing that she had prepared his favorite meal. Immediately Ese fell to the ground unconscious. Ejiro's eyes cleared as reality stared him right in the face. He rushed her to the hospital and lied to the doctors that she tripped and fell. What he did not know was that his wife Ase regained her consciousness for a brief moment and revealed to a nurse that her husband beat her to stupor. The nurse turned out to be Efosa's mother, who was working in the hospital at the time. She watched as Ejiro lied to everyone that cared to listen that his wife tripped and fell. Efosa's mother, on hearing about Dise's condition, quickly realized that Dise was the same baby she helped to birth so many years ago, the one born without a vagina. So she confronted Mr. Ejiro, who pleaded with her not to punish his daughter for something she had no control over. Dise could not believe her ears. Her father, who she grew up to love with all of her heart, was the same man who ended her mother's life prematurely. Dise could feel her heart sink. She asked her father the reason why he subjected her mother to so much pain, and her father confessed to having no reason for his actions. His wife was an orphan, so he knew that he could get away with maltreating her for no just cause. I was so quick-tempered, he said to his daughter, Dise, who stood up from her chair and began to run out of his office. Her father pleaded for her forgiveness, but Dise could not bring herself to forgive him. She needed time to process the information she had just heard. For all these years, Dise secretly blamed herself for the death of her mother. It has been a painful existence for her, seeing that she suffered from a rare condition, which she believed was a curse and punishment for being responsible for her mother's death. This new revelation shattered her perception of her father and her past. Dise felt a great void in her heart and found it difficult to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster her father had just confessed to being. Engulfed in her own thoughts, Dise returned home and locked herself up in her room. She cried her eyes out, and despite the fact that she never got to meet her mother, she felt the pain like a freshly opened wound. Her father returned home later that night and stood at her door for hours, pleading with her to speak to him, but Dise could not bring herself to talk to him. Her phone began to ring, but Dise ignored the call, assuming that it was her father. The ringing continued persistently, and in frustration, Dise angrily switched off her phone, not caring to check who was calling. She sat on her bed, weeping as she buried her face in her hands. The weight of her father's confession was too much for her to bear. Her heart ached, and the tears continued to flow. Dise felt so terrible ignoring her father, but she could not bring herself to face him, seeing all the things that he confessed to her. A few hours later, she heard a loud scream and rushed out to check what it was, and to her surprise, she saw her father lying on the floor unconscious. He had gulped down a poisonous substance, and Dise was so petrified to see her father's lifeless body on the floor. Her entire body froze as her hands shook in extreme fear and pain. Dise screamed out in terror as she quickly grabbed her phone and called Efosa, who had called her over 20 times that night. He was so worried about her and could not sleep. When her call came through, Efosa quickly picked it up to know if she was fine. "My father is dead," Dise said in a shaky voice. Efosa's heart sank, hearing the distress in her voice. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," he said as he hung up the call and quickly grabbed his car keys and headed out. A few minutes later, Efosa arrived at her house and met Dise staring blankly at her father's lifeless body. "I killed him," Dise said as tears poured down her eyes. "I should have just forgiven him," she said as she let out a very loud cry. Efosa rushed to her side to comfort her, assuring her that she had no hand in the death of her father. Morning came, and the news of her father's death spread around town, as well as the fact that Dise was born without a vagina. The people were so shocked and began to gossip. They wondered why her father killed himself in such a way, and many assumed that her father died because he was ashamed of having a daughter like her. Others believed that their family's curse was behind her father's strange death. No one had ever seen or heard of a woman born without a vagina and could not wrap their heads around the situation and why it could have occurred. So they concluded that Dise and her family were cursed and began to keep away from her. Many wondered how down they looked and did not hesitate to ask Dise, who felt so embarrassed to hear such questions from complete strangers. This was the beginning of misery for Dise, who the people talked about and pointed at whenever she walked past them on the streets. Some even attributed her father's wealth to her condition, saying that her late father most likely used her vagina for rituals. All the men who once looked at her in admiration now avoided her like a plague. Dise felt like a ghost in her own town, condemned for something she had no control over. Her fate with Efosa now hung in the balance, seeing his mother's stance about their marriage. However, Efosa assured her that he would marry her no matter what. One morning, this was a few days after her father's burial, Disa received an unexpected visit from her father's brother, who informed her that he was moving into her father's house to take charge of all that her father owned. He gave Disa 3 days to move out of the house, saying that he could not have a cursed girl living under the same roof as himself. Disa stood there, unable to utter a word. Her father's only brother had now disowned her and didn't want anything to do with her. Efosa, seeing how everything had turned out, offered Dise a room in his house. His heart broke to see the woman that he loved go through so much pain and rejection. His mother, on hearing this, yelled at him angrily, asking why he had to decide to stick to a woman that even her own family rejected. Efosa felt so terrible to hear such a question from his mother. He informed her that Dise was the love of his life and that nothing would ever stop him from marrying her. His mother was so furious to see how adamant her son was about marrying Dise. How do you plan on having children with a woman who clearly has no vagina? She asked her son, who paused for a second and informed his mother that he will figure it out. I care so much about Dise, and I believe that as long as I am with her, I'll be complete, Efosa said to his mother, who bit her lips in anger. She could not understand why her son had decided to marry an incomplete woman when there were thousands of women out there who were complete. She pondered on what to do as she watched her son walk out on her angrily. Efosa had gone to pick Dise up from her father's house. Her uncle threw her things out of her father's house that evening, and Efosa could not stand her living on the street. His mother, knowing this, decided to also move into her son's house to make it so uncomfortable for Dise to live. She taunted her at every given opportunity and even told her to her face that her son would never marry her. He only pities you because of how your entire family rejected you, she said to Dise, who burst out in tears as she listened to all that she had to say. If you think my son really loves you as you assume, let him marry you, or what is he waiting for? She taunted Dise again, who stood there stunned and unable to speak. Dise felt so rejected and unwelcome, despite Efosa's effort to make her feel comfortable in his home. She could not help but think that Efosa was truly with her out of pity, so she confronted him about their marriage plans, and Efosa informed her that he wanted to take things slow. Seeing all that had happened, Dise in that moment could sense something off with Efosa. His response seemed so undecided, and Dise could not help but think that truly Efosa was still with her out of pity, as his mother's words continued to ring in her mind, convincing her of her worst fears. Unable to withstand the thought any longer, Dise packed up her bags and left Efosa's house the next morning. She had to take her destiny into her hands and not allow herself to be trapped in a life where she was constantly questioned and pitied by those around her. By the time Efosa woke up, he realized that Dise was nowhere to be found. He approached his mother to ask where she had gone, but his mother rolled her eyes and asked why he was bothering himself about an incomplete woman. I have a beautiful girl that I want you to marry, she said to Efosa, who looked her in the eyes and said that he would never marry another woman if he misses his chances of marrying Dise. His mother had not seen him this serious in her entire life. He left the house angry and searched the entire place for Dise, but Dise was nowhere to be found. He decided to stop by her father's house and met her uncle, who seemed not to know where she was. Efosa was so broken to realize that Dise had gone. It was as if a part of him had left, and Efosa began to lose sleep, fearing for the safety of the woman that he so loved. His mother, on seeing how withdrawn her son had become, decided to introduce him to a very beautiful woman who she believed had all it took to be his wife. Her name was Efere, and she was a stunning young woman who was the only daughter of his mother's childhood friend. Efere was everything Efosa's mother had hoped for: beautiful, intelligent, and she was from a very good family. Efosa's mother, who was so determined to make Efere a part of their family, encouraged her to do whatever it took to win her son's heart. So, Efere spent most of her time in Efosa's house, preparing his favorite meals and even wearing seductive outfits in a bid to grab Efosa's attention. But no matter how hard she tried, Efosa paid no form of attention to her. He was so distant and preoccupied, and Efere could not help but notice that Efosa was deeply in love with another woman. She was so devastated to see the man that she hoped to marry ignore her despite all she did to gain his attention. His mother, seeing all that was happening, decided to step in to ensure that her son got married to Efere. She could not risk Dise resurfacing and ruining everything for her. So, she approached her son and threatened to stop taking her medications if he refuses to marry Efere. Efosa watched as his mother walked out on him angrily and knew that she was going to keep to her promise. He could not risk her health deteriorating because he knew that once she stops taking her medications, she would become extremely ill. Torn between his love for Dise and his love for his own mother, Efosa found himself trapped in an impossible situation. His mother, however, was so happy because she knew that her plan would work. She decided to follow through with her threat and stop taking her medications, forcing Efosa to bend to her will. Efosa agreed to marry Efere, despite knowing that he had no atom of love for her. A date for their wedding was set, and his mother began preparations for the ceremony. Efere, his wife-to-be, knew that Efosa was not in love with her. However, his mother assured her that as the months went by, her son would come around and love her. "I know my son. He will fall in love with you in no time," she assured Efere, who smiled and nodded in agreement, silently hoping that Efosa would eventually forget about Dise and come to see her as the loving wife that she wished to be. As the wedding preparations began, Efosa's heart was heavy with sadness. He could not stop thinking about Dise, and every day that passed, he regretted ever allowing his mother's words to affect his actions. He knew that his response to her question on that fateful day was what led her to leave, and this broke his heart, knowing that a different response could have made a huge difference in how everything turned out. The day of the wedding arrived, and Efosa finally got married to Efere. His mother was so excited, as though she was the newly wedded bride. Efosa, who was supposed to be in high spirits, felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He could not believe that he had finally married another woman, something he promised himself never to do. Efosa had never felt this hurt in his entire life. His heart ached for Dise, the one woman who he truly loved. The thought of hurting her with his actions hurt him even more, as he hoped and prayed that she understands wherever she is. Months passed, and Efosa remained hopeful that Dise would return, but she never did. His wife Efere did everything to win his love, but Efosa was clearly not in love with her. She became so frustrated, trying everything possible to win the heart of a man who was clearly in love with another woman. As the months went by, Efere became a shadow of herself, always angry and frustrated, and Efosa could not help but notice that he was the cause of her frustration. All she had ever done was please him, but his actions towards her were cold and distant. She put her heart and soul into their marriage, doing everything she could to earn his love and affection. Initially, Efosa felt a deep sense of pity for her, but over time, this pity gradually transformed into genuine feelings, and Efosa found himself falling in love with his wife Efere. Months turned into years, and Efosa and his wife Efere lived happily in their home. However, they were still yet to have children of their own. His mother, being an experienced nurse, suggested that they carry out some necessary tests in the hospital to understand why they were struggling to have children. Efere and Efosa carried out the necessary tests and realized that Efere had some medical issues that prevented her from conceiving a child. Their doctor, on seeing their test result, suggested that they visit a specialist doctor in the neighboring city. They were given the contact details of the specialist doctor, who agreed to meet with them. The date of their appointment arrived, and Efosa's mother decided to accompany them to the specialist hospital. They arrived at the hospital a few hours later and saw Dise, who walked out of the doctor's office heavily pregnant. Efosa's mother could not hide her shock as she wondered how it was possible for Dise to be pregnant without a vagina. Little did she know that Dise's decision to leave on that fateful day was what led her to finding a solution to her problem. What had happened was that on the day that Dise left Efosa's home, she traveled to a faraway place where no one knew her, hoping to start life afresh. However, this was not so easy for her, as she was attacked by some hoodlums who took all that she had, including her bags and money. Dise knew no one around and had nowhere to stay, so she had no other option but to put up in an uncompleted building where she slept with mosquitoes and crawling insects feasting on her delicate skin. One night, as she slept in the uncompleted building, a group of bad boys surrounded her and tried to make their way with her. Dise screamed out at the top of her voice, but no one was there to save her. The boys forced themselves on her and realized that she had no vagina. Terrified at the sight, they scampered for their lives, thinking that she was a spirit, leaving her there horrified and devastated. Dise had nowhere else to go and was filled with extreme fear. She sat there hoping to remain safe till morning, and when morning came, her eyes were so heavy as she was unable to catch any sleep at night. Dise then decided to take a quick nap to regain her strength. She lay down to sleep, and after a few hours, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Opening up her eyes, Dise caught sight of a handsome man who was staring down at her angrily. She quickly stood up and pleaded with the man not to harm her. The man was so shocked to hear this. He began to yell angrily at the top of his voice, asking why she felt so comfortable to sleep in his building. "Why are you sleeping here?" he asked Dise, who stammered for some seconds and said to him that she had nowhere else to go. Dise could see the anger in the young man's face as he screamed at her angrily and walked her out from the building, warning her never to step her foot there again. Dise could not help but feel ashamed of herself. She left the building in tears, wondering where she would go from there. Just as she was about leaving the building, an old man stopped her to apologize for how his son spoke to her. The old man was so soft spoken and kind, and Dise could see the kindness in his eyes when he asked her why she was sleeping in the uncompleted building. Dise, feeling so overwhelmed and ashamed, hesitated for a moment. However, something about the old man made her feel safe enough to open up to him. She explained her situation to him, telling him about her father's death, her medical condition, and how everything she had in life was taken away from her after her father's death. The old man listened to her story, his face full of concern, as his son Irikefe walked out of the building and met his father talking to Dise. Irikefe watched as his father apologized to Dise for how badly he treated her, and this infuriated him greatly. My son did not know your story, but he should not have spoken to you the way that he did, the old man said to Dise, who he invited to come live in their home with them. His son Irikefe fumed in anger and asked his father why he was falling cheap for her gimmicks. I know people like you, he said to Dise, who could see the hatred in his eyes. Dise did not want to cause any form of trouble between the son and his father, seeing how agitated he looked at her. So, she declined his father's offer of coming to live in their home with them. But his father insisted that she comes with them, saying that he would not forgive himself if anything bad happens to her. That was how Dise began to live with the rich man and his family. His son Irikefe made life a living hell for her. He made no secret of his hatred for her, treating her unkindly, often using harsh words on her and calling her a thief who came to rip his father off of his money. He saw her as a thief who had somehow wormed her way into his father's good graces. So, he made it his mission to chase her out of their home, often sabotaging her efforts to make her look bad in the eyes of his father. Dise, however, tried to maintain her composure. She understood that Rikefe was not used to having strangers in his home, so she tried her possible best not to cause any more trouble than she already had. She stayed out of his way, focusing on helping his father and maintaining the house, but Irikefe's cruelty often brought her to tears. He would call her names, accuse her of being a thief, and warn her to stay away from his father and himself. The tension between them reached its peak one night when Irikefe deliberately threw away the meal Dise had prepared for his father, claiming that the food was not even worthy to be served to a dog. Dise could not hold back her tears any longer. She broke down in front of him, her pent-up frustration and pain pouring out as she sobbed uncontrollably. The sight of her crying, however, did not soften Irikefe's heart as he simply turned his back and walked away, leaving her in the pool of her tears. Days turned into weeks, and Dise continued to live with the old man and his son Irikefe. She took good care of the old man, who reminded her so much about her father. One morning, the old man was about leaving the house for the bank to deposit a huge amount of money when he slumped and fell to the ground unconscious. Dise immediately called his son, who ignored her calls repeatedly because of his hatred for her. She then left him a text message stating that his father had just collapsed. Irikefe's eyes widened when he received the message. He knew that his father was going to deposit a huge amount of money that morning and panicked because he knew that Dise was all alone with his father. He quickly got into his car and drove home, hoping to meet them there, but Dise and his father were nowhere to be found. The money too was nowhere in sight, and Irikefe's heart raced with panic and anger. Where could she have taken him? He muttered to himself as he feared for his father's safety. He imagined the worst, thinking that Dise might have taken advantage of his father's condition to steal the money and disappear. He was about to call the police when his phone rang. It was an unknown number, so he picked up quickly to know who it was. Hello? Is this Irikefe? A calm voice on the other end asked. Yes, who is this? Irikefe demanded impatiently. This is Dr. Abby from Hope Clinic. Your father is here and he's stable now, but we need to keep him for observation. A young lady brought him in just in time, the doctor said, as she urged him to get down to the hospital immediately. Irikefe quickly dashed to the hospital and caught sight of Dise, who was sitting in the hospital ward, her face pale with worry as tears poured down her eyes. Beside her was his father, resting comfortably on the hospital bed with an IV drip attached to his arm. Irikefe hesitated for a moment before approaching Dise. She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. He could see the fear and exhaustion on her face, and for the first time, Irikefe saw her not as an intruder, but as someone who genuinely cared about his father. You brought him here? Irikefe stammered, still struggling with what he had seen. Dise nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. He collapsed while getting ready to leave. I didn't know what else to do, so I brought him here, she said to Irikefe as she handed him his father's briefcase filled with money. Irikefe could not believe his eyes. All the while, he had treated Dise so unfairly because he believed that she was a thief. Now, he stood there and watched the same woman who he accused of being a thief hand over hundreds of millions of naira to him without taking a single dime. He realized that she was not a thief, but a kind and caring person who had just been misunderstood. Irikefe felt so terrible within himself. He explained to Dise that he accused her of being a thief because he had heard so many terrible stories of dubious people camping in uncompleted buildings with the hope of meeting its owners to rip them off of their money. So, when he met her sleeping in their building, he was so convinced that Dise was one of these dubious people, and the fact that his father was now inviting her into their home made him so furious to see his father falling cheap for her gimmicks. Little did he know that Dise was not a thief. Irikefe in that moment was overwhelmed with guilt and shame for having doubted her intentions. He realized how wrong he had been about her all along. Dise had done what any caring person would do. She had saved his father's life without a second thought, even though he had treated her so unfairly. I'm so sorry, Dise, Irikefe said, his voice breaking as he spoke. I misjudged you. I thought you were trying to take advantage of my father. I was so wrong. Please forgive me, he said to Dise, who gave him a faint smile as tears poured down her eyes. I understand why you felt that way. I know I came into your life suddenly, but I will never harm your father, she said to Irikefe, who could hear the sincerity in her voice. Dise forgave him for all that he put her through, and over the next few days, Irikefe and Dise spent time together at the hospital, caring for his father, who slowly recovered and regained his health. They began to understand each other, and Dise told him her entire story and the ordeal she had to face because she was different. Irikefe, on hearing this, informed her of his cousin who had handled a similar case to hers in the past. So, he quickly called up his cousin, who agreed to meet with Dise to discuss her condition. Surprisingly, after thorough examination, it was realized that Dise, despite not having a physical vagina, had a full-size uterus capable of carrying a child. A series of surgeries were carried out and Dise's condition was finally rectified. Irikefe stood by her all through the journey, caring and providing the support that she needed. His initial anger and resentment towards her had completely transformed into admiration and deep sense of love and affection. Irikefe was now deeply in love with Dise and could not imagine a life without her. One evening, as they both sat in the hospital, Irikefe confessed his feelings for her and asked Dise to marry him. Dise found her heart racing as she heard him speak. The last time she had this feeling was with Efosa, and Dise did not know what to make of it. Was she now in love with Irikefe? She thought to herself as she found her heart overwhelmed with joy at the thought of him. Dise had never imagined that a day would come when she would fall in love with another. Everything seemed to now be falling in place as she accepted to be his wife. Not long afterwards, they got married and Dise got pregnant for him. No one ever imagined that a woman who was born without a vagina would one day carry a child of her own. They all stood there at the hospital as Efosa's mother stared shockingly at Dise's pregnant belly. Efosa's mother could not believe her eyes. The woman she had once dismissed as incomplete and cursed was now carrying a child. Her initial shock turned into a whirlwind of emotions, shame, regret, and a deep sense of realization about her past mistakes. Efosa, standing beside his mother, was equally stunned. Seeing Dise with Irikefe, he felt a mixture of joy for her and sadness for what could have been for him. He realized that Dise had found the love and support she truly deserved, something he had failed to provide when he let his mother's prejudice to cloud his judgment. Efosa's mother, feeling so terrible for all she did to Dise in the past, apologized to her and asked for her forgiveness. Dise could see the sincerity in her eyes. She had gone through so much pain because of this woman's words, but she knew that holding on to bitterness would only poison her happiness, so she forgave her and let go of all the hurt. Efosa, who had been silently watching, stepped forward. Dise, he said, his voice filled with emotions. I am happy for you, Dise. I am so sorry for not being there for you when you needed me the most. You deserve all the happiness in the world, and I'm glad you found it. Dise smiled warmly at Efosa, her eyes filled with kindness as she thanked him for his kind words and wished him the very best. The day of her delivery finally arrived, and Dise gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Irikefe held his daughter in his arms as tears poured down his eyes. She's perfect, he said to Dise, who could not believe that she was now a mother. All her life, Dise never envisioned herself carrying her own child in her arms. This was a dream come true, and Dise in that moment wished her father was still alive to see his grandchild. They finally named their daughter Essie after Dise's late mother, honoring the memory of a woman whose life had been marked by tragedy but whose spirit had lived on in her daughter for all these years. Dise and her husband finally moved into their own home, the uncompleted building that Dise once slept alone in the dark, the place where they first met, although not in the most pleasant circumstances, had now been transformed into a beautiful house filled with love and warmth. That was how Dise lived happily with her daughter and husband, who brought so much joy to her life. The lesson to be learned from this story is that nothing remains hidden forever. Never mock a pain you have not felt, and learn to be kind to the people you meet along the way, because you never know what the future holds. Do not judge a person too quickly, because your judgment of them might just end up being wrong. Last but not least, learn to forgive others of their wrongs and love your neighbor as yourself, as only then would we live in a peaceful world. I hope you enjoyed the story.